Hey guys, in this video I want to talk about a chapter of the book The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek. Hayek was an Austrian political philosopher and an economist. He was born in 1899 and he died in 1992. And he was the co-winner of the Nobel Prize for Economics in 1974. And in this little book of 240 pages, he described why socialism is such a bad idea. He talks about social planning, which is socialism. When I started reading this book a few years ago, I asked a friend, like, why is this book so thin? And he said, well, because you don't need many words to explain why socialism is such a bad idea. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I want to talk about the chapter The End of Truth, because that is more like the psychological side of the whole totalitarianism, because socialism eventually is a totalitarian system. And Hayek wrote the book because of the things that happened in the 20th century with communism, which is a form of socialism, and Nazism, National Socialism, which is, of course, a form of socialism, even though many people deny that. But he also explains in the book itself why National Socialism is in fact socialism. It all comes down to the totalitarian system, and I made 3 videos on totalitarianism in the past based on the book of Hannah Arendt. But I think it's just a really interesting and important topic because we are in the middle of, well, the road to serfdom. And it also says here on the first page, it's a quote from David Hume: "It is seldom that liberty of any kind is lost all at once." So I do recognize the slippery slope that we're on, and when you read this book you will recognize it too. So a totalitarian system, in short, is a system in which the state has total control, even over the minds of the people. They want total control so they can plan everything. That's the social planning that Hayek talks about. When everything is controlled, there is no freedom whatsoever. You can't freely think, you can't do anything spontaneous. There is no spontaneous creation of new things because everything needs to be controlled. So why is that? Because that's what you would wonder, right? Like, why would you want that? Well, because people want power. And the more control you have, the more power you have, right? Because control is power. When you control things, you have power over things. When you control your own life, you have power over your own life. When you control other people's lives, you have power over their lives. And it usually works like this, that people always want more. It is the monster that wants more and more and more and more and is never satisfied. You know, like making money. I never really heard anyone saying like, oh, I've made enough money. No, people want more. So the end of truth is the psychological part of the story of how to get to a place of a totalitarian system. What is the road to serfdom actually? Like what happens there? So first of all people need to believe the same doctrine. Everybody needs to actually believe, not just practice, but really believe the doctrine of the state. They need to be convinced of it. So how do you get all the people to believe the same thing? That's what most of the chapter is about. So first of all, there's propaganda. And the funny thing is that people tend to think that propaganda is always something used in foreign countries or in the past, but it's never here and now. They don't realize, and maybe because of pride, like I talked about in my previous video, maybe because of pride, but they tend to think that propaganda is never here and now, and they won't or can't be influenced by propaganda because they would see through the lie. But no. Most people won't see through the lie. Most people, they just go along They believe in the propaganda. And it's not a matter of intelligence. It's easy to think, and makes sense to think, that the more intelligent you are, the better you are able to realize when the story is false, when the doctrine is false. But no, it doesn't work like that, because it's a psychological thing. It's an emotional thing often. Even the brightest minds can be deceived. So then in the propaganda, all the media outlets, they have to tell the same story. They all have to. There can't be any dissidence. Then there's of course also the schools. They also have to tell the same story. And the science, because of course the science, like I explained in another video, that you should never believe the science. There is no such thing as the science. Scientists will never agree with each other. But the moment when the story is that all scientists agree, you should be worried, because that's pseudoscience. That is what a totalitarian system, the state that is on the road to a totalitarian system, uses. They use pseudoscience to justify their actions. So what happens to scientists that have another story, that have other findings? Well, they're being prosecuted. Scientific books from the past that tell another story, they're being burned, even though these days it's a little bit different because it's all a digital thing, so it's easy to just change everything all at once. But yeah, in the past the books were being burned and scientists were being persecuted because all scientists have to agree. So the media, the schools and the science, they all have the same story. They all tell the same doctrine. And that is all to make everybody believe, being convinced of the same story. And the doctrine of the state is based on beliefs that people already had, like moral beliefs. But then they convinced the people that, you know, those beliefs were great, but they never really understood their own beliefs. And then the state explains why this is so important. And then they change this belief, this creed of people, into the doctrine that they want people to believe. So for example, freedom. Like, freedom is wonderful. We should be free. People should be free, right? So in communism, the idea was that people should be free of the oppressive bourgeoisie and the oppressive elites. People should be free of the economic burden, the burden of inequality. When everybody would be equal, then they would be free, right? But then when you think about it a little bit longer, then this explanation of freedom is the exact opposite of what freedom means. Because when everybody has to be equal, nobody has the freedom to freely explore things, freely create things, freely think even. Because when everybody has to be equal, you can't have your own thoughts. You are being convinced that you are being freed by the state, but actually they turn you into some kind of robots, into slaves. And this is what George Orwell in his book 1984 beautifully put: freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, and war is peace. So in the totalitarian system, they change the meaning of the words in the exact opposite. So they take a moral belief of people, like I said, freedom, and then they turn it around into the opposite. And this didn't just happen with freedom, it also happens with words like rights and law, and these days tolerance and inclusivity and health, words like that. And then they change into the opposite meaning, and because of that, words become meaningless and hollow. So then eventually a totalitarian system, socialism, it destroys morality. Because, like I said, people have moral beliefs and they change it into the opposite, in which they destroy morality altogether and all feelings of morality. Because all people have to believe in the same doctrine. And people that don't believe in the same doctrine, what happens to them? You know, people that have criticism, people that actually research and actually want to find out the truth. Those people are, of course, being prosecuted. First, they are being censored, something that we often see today. People are being censored. And then, you know, next step is those people are being persecuted because, you know, most people, they go along with the state, you know, the masses, they go along with the state doctrine, but there's always a tiny group of people that is critical about these things. But since the state wants everybody to believe in the exact same doctrine, there's no room for dissidents. They're being portrayed as traitors and they need to be eradicated. And the funny thing is that the masses that are going along with the doctrine of the state, they have no idea that they believe a lie, that they were or are being indoctrinated, that they are being brainwashed, that they are being programmed, because they are convinced that whatever they believe is because of their freedom to think. But in a totalitarian system, there is no freedom of thought, but people believe that they have the freedom of thought. And so this is something which is very fascinating, of course, because you can test it with yourself. Like, okay, so what do you believe? And why do you believe what you believe? Were you programmed to believe this? Or is it actually because you really thought about it and you really tested it and you really considered it? And you also looked into other perspectives and other theories about this. So a lot of people believe that dinosaurs roamed the earth. But why? Why? Is it because a lot of people believe this and because you learned this as a child? Did you actually investigate this topic? Is there actual evidence? Well, you might believe that there is evidence in museums. Did you ever see the evidence? Did you ever test the evidence? Did you ever consider that it might not be true? It is funny to test for yourself, are my beliefs based on what I was told as a child without any investigation from my side? Or are my ideas based on my own critical thinking and my own investigations? People that are indoctrinated don't realize that they are indoctrinated. I might be indoctrinated. You might be indoctrinated. And that is what a totalitarian state does. They indoctrinate people because everybody has to believe the same thing. So first of all, the state uses the moral beliefs of people to fortify their doctrine. But then, of course, they take the moral belief and they change it into the opposite, in which they destroy the morals. And then they use pseudoscience to extra fortify their doctrine. Like I said in my other video, scientists never really agree. When you really research, there are so many factors that play along when you do research. So scientists never really agree. But when all scientists agree, that's pseudoscience. Then there is a reason for why they all agree. Then there is money and power and the state involved. And then you can ask yourself, okay, so which great topics of today have the same narrative and about what do all scientists agree? So for example, the climate change story, it's all scientists agree, or 99% pseudoscience. But also virus stories, you know, like there is a lot of money and power and the state involved in those stories. And when you follow the money, then it explains why all those institutions, the state, the media, the science, education system, why they all use the same doctrine. So eventually, because of all those things, the same doctrine that's being used, people don't have their freedom of thought anymore, even though they think they have, but they don't. The morality that is being destroyed, all those things play a part in the end of truth in the totalitarian system. Everybody has to believe and think the same way because the state needs to control everything fully. There is no room for spontaneity. There is no room for actual freedom. Everything needs to be controlled, and this is why George Orwell said freedom is slavery. So I hope you liked this video. I hope you learned something. So yeah, if you want to read more about it, The Road to Serfdom from Friedrich Hayek. And of course, if you want to understand your own unconscious, if you want to understand your dreams, feel free to plan a free conversation with me on my website www.in-dreams.nl. I also have a webinar there in which I explain about dreams and archetypes and symbols in dreams. So feel free to contact me, and I hope to see you in the next